When you're early in life, growing up, whatever you experience is what you consider to be normal. For example, when I was a kid, our family would go to church every Sunday. We knew everyone there, I had lots of friends there, and there was always a big crowd of people. So naturally, I just kind of assumed that everyone on Sunday mornings would be in a church somewhere. But it was kind of a disconnect when we'd be in the car on Sunday and we might drive past a park or a boat marina, and I'd see people getting their boat ready to go out on the water. And I'd think, how does that work? Maybe they go to a different church that meets later or something? I couldn't put those pieces together because what I thought was the norm wasn't really the norm for everyone. My guest today, Mayson, also had a childhood that was different from many other kids. From the time she was a baby, she and her mother would go and visit her dad on weekends in prison. And since that was all she had ever known, she assumed that's what everyone did. Her eyes were opened on her 12th birthday, and you're about to hear that story. What Mayson has done for herself is truly amazing. And toward the end of our conversation, she revealed something that she only just discovered as a result of coming on this podcast. Real people in unreal situations.
There is a girl hanging by her broken leg from the telephone wire.
And I called 911 and I said, I found a baby.
I turned around. I see a gun pointed at me close enough I could touch it.
She would hold our heads underwater all the time.
He levels the gun, pulls the trigger, and I go down.
Her eyes were full of tears. She didn't want to leave us.
My hair catches on fire.
I swear to God, this image is burned in my head for the rest of my life.
I'm Scott Johnson, and this is What Was That Like? Your whole story started actually with a lie. What was that?
My biological parents met. My mother was bartending at a bar in a small town in Oklahoma, and she met my father. I'm not sure if he was a regular or if this was just a one time he walked into the right or wrong bar, depending on your perspective. But eventually they had conversation and they bonded over being recently divorced. And at some point they fell in love. But he spun a story of having a beautiful blended family. He told my mother that he didn't have any kids, but he was, always meant to be a father. And she had 2 children, my brothers, from a previous marriage. And he was like, let's blend them. And I really want a daughter. And she loved hearing that. And so they fell in love and got pregnant with me. And when she told him of this happy news, he admitted that he was not divorced, rather he was still married, and he did have children of his own. I think at the time he had just his 2 daughters.
It's so weird. She was giving him what he said he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he didn't think she was going to call his bluff.
Yeah, I wonder this. And obviously his marriage wasn't in a good place, or maybe it was, but he was just in a bad place. I have so many questions surrounding how they met, but it just seems so perfect. And maybe she was prey to him. Like, this is what I want. You're giving it to me. Actually, never mind. I already have this.
So what happened at that point? Was he just gone?
For what I know, he was like, I have a family, I have children. I think it got too real for him at that point. Maybe in that moment, he saw the value of what he had with his real family, I guess. And to my knowledge, they never spoke again. And my mother is very religious. She's Southern Baptist. I grew up Southern Baptist. So not having me was never an option. And so she became a single parent to 3 children.
What a spot, man.
Yeah, although I have difficult feelings surrounding my mother, I can only imagine like the shock and the significant break in trust. Like, I can't even imagine what that feels like.
So that's kind of the backdrop to this. The real story is her next relationship. How did that happen?
My mother has 4 brothers, and interestingly, all of them but one have served time in prison sentences of 20 years or more. And so she was out of prison, pregnant, and visiting with my uncle. He was like, I have someone that I would like to introduce you to. And I believe Stephen was visiting with his sister at the time. And I really wish I knew more about their initial meeting, and like the conversation that happened, like when did he tell her why he was there, like.
Wait a minute, let's clear this up a little bit. Stephen is actually an inmate also at the prison. Is that right?
Yes, correct. Yeah. And at the time he had been in there for, just over 10 years.
So he's been in there a while. So she just happened to be visiting her brother, and someone else was visiting Stephen at the same time.
Yeah.
And her brother, your uncle, wanted to introduce the two of them.
Yeah, they were really close friends in the prison that they were at. And my uncle was also I'm not sure how to say this, but he was the chaplain as well, like the inmate chaplain. And I think that there's a very common theme of people in prison or jail finding religion and finding that strength there. And they bonded over that and became good buds. I would imagine, like, I've never heard the story of my uncle's side, but I would imagine he's thinking, I have this sister. It's my only sister, and you're single. She's here all the time. You're definitely here all the time. So let's introduce you two.
From the time your biological father fled the scene till your mom met Stephen in prison, do you know how much time had possibly passed? I'm wondering if it was like a rebound kind of thing.
Well, I know at least that it was 9 months, because she was pregnant with me while she was visiting my uncle when they met.
So a matter of months anyway.
Yeah.
I just find it so weird. I know it happens all the time, and most commonly a woman will fall in love with some man who's in prison. I don't understand that.
And neither do I. And again, I wish I knew more about that conversation, because I'm deeply curious just how someone meets a convict and falls in love knowing that obviously you're there for some type of crime. And in my father's case, my adoptive father's case, the type of prison that he was at is one for violent criminals. So murderers, rapists, things of that nature. She knew that much, at least, and still went for it. Stephen then put my mother on his visitation call list and letter list. they fell in love through recorded phone calls and opened letters, letters opened to check for contraband and things like that. That's how they fell in love. And then they married the day before I turned 1 year old.
I'm wondering, is it possible? I mean, sometimes even if someone's in prison, they could have some kind of income, like a disability or a pension or, something like that. Did he have any of that, or do you know?
I do not believe that he has any disability. He was always this really big, strong man, like wildly tall. And so I don't think that that was an aspect. And I mean, being an inmate, he made pennies on the dollar. So I really don't think that it was for any financial gain. I think that my mother had a substantial sized hole, and she wanted to fill that with love, which is, totally understandable. But at what lengths do you go before you question, is this a healthy relationship? Is this a viable relationship? We will literally never be together. They've never done anything more than a hug.
Yeah, it's an unusual thing. So you said they got married just before your first birthday. Was she working at the time?
I believe so. She had to have been, because she had my two brothers and then, me on the way.
I just can't imagine doing that with a single mother, 3 kids. And I mean, what are the chances that she would meet somebody that would say, "Oh yeah, you've got 3 kids? Yeah, let's get together. That's what I'm looking for."
I really think that fed into the romance of it all. She found someone who accepted her. She found someone who would look at her baggage, if you will, which are 2 children and then a baby on the way from other men, and say, I accept you and I love you, and we can create a family. We can create a family around this. And I mean, I can see the appeal in that.
Yeah.
I suppose.
How did that progress?
I mean, it was great. My time growing up in prison or visiting my father was awesome. I made a lot of friends, other inmates, as well as the children there visiting their fathers. There was a playground, so parents can have, I guess, alone time. And for me, being my normal, it was an awesome experience. I really looked forward to visiting my father, and we did that often. During the school year, we would visit every other weekend, and during the summer or any breaks for holiday, we would visit every weekend. And while it did come with some, now I know, some bizarre norms, like getting my little backpack searched and my undeveloped body searched by strange men in uniform, it was still my normal. And it always meant that I was going to see my father. And there was just this, I don't know, I'm struggling to find the word. Sorry.
It was a routine that you were used to.
Exactly. Yeah. And I found great comfort in that routine.
Yeah. And since it started from a very young age, you had no reason to question that it wasn't the norm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, I questioned my friends' norms. Like, I was extremely uncomfortable being around adult men. Like, when I would stay the night with a friend, I was this bizarre kid, it seems. And from their perspective, I get it, because I'm like, when is your dad leaving? Is your dad staying? Like, why is your dad here? They're like, a child. And like, I don't know how to answer that. But being with my friends' fathers or like around them, weird experience, because I was always used to a hug on arrival and a hug on departure, and then sitting across from the table, and that's it. And so watching them hug and sit on the couch together is just very uncomfortable feeling.
You had mentioned that you didn't really understand what prison was until your older brother went there.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? What got him sent there?
What didn't get him sent there? It's weird when I tell this story because ironically, prison was my safe place, my calm place. I knew what to expect. Whereas my life outside of prison was absolute chaos. I have two much older brothers, 12 and 14 years older than me, respectively. And I kind of consider myself to be an only child just because of the age gap. Also, they were in juvie as young teens and then jail and prison as adults. And their crimes spanned from grand theft auto to breaking and entering, but mainly drug charges and a lot of drunken like DUIs and a lot of gang activity, but mainly drugs. And so it's interesting because when they were home, it was great. I had so much fun with them. They had a lot of friends that all adored me. Like, I was this 6-year-old little sister to probably a dozen or so young men or teenage boys. And with that, I experienced my first crushes and I had a lot of attention. And it took a while for me to realize that there was a lot of bad in that too. I grew up knowing this name called the Brotherhood. I now know that was the name of their gang. But again, that was my safe place. And so I learned about prison through all of these, like, where's Fatty? He was one of my favorites. Where's Fatty? And like, oh, he's behind bars is what they would say. I'm just like, behind bars? What is that? And then hearing adult conversation around me, jail, prison. Like, what is prison? What is all of this? And then later I come to find out that that's where I spent most of my time. And so I guess going back to the juxtaposition of my life inside of prison being calm and my life outside being chaos is, while they weren't in prison, there was a lot of fear. I've seen so many broken bones from gang fights. I've seen bones just from these massive open wounds that my mother would mend because there's a bullet hole or someone got beaten almost to death with a tire iron, and you don't take them to the hospital unless there's an absolute need. It's very much like a mafia film. Like, you have a little secret doctor. I've tended these wounds myself. I've helped pick out bullet shrapnel from legs and the side of someone's back before.
And you were still a kid.
I was still a kid, yes.
You finally realized that the prison, that whole system where you were so comfortable, was also the place really where all the bad people went. But yet your dad was there. And, and I would imagine on those weekend visits, that was probably the highlight of his week. So he's going to be in a good mood. He's going to be happy to see you and all of that. So that had to create some kind of confusion for you, I would think.
Yes, a lot of confusion because he was, like you said, like in a great mood, just really happy to see us. So I've never seen my parents fight before because when you have limited time, I suppose there's nothing to really fight about. Kind of putting those puzzle pieces together and conceptualizing and building an idea of what prison is. It was just bizarre to think that my dad was there. It made sense for my brothers to go because I see them doing mean things to people, but it never made sense why my dad was there.
By any chance, just a random question, but did your brothers go to the same prison where your dad was?
I mean, Oklahoma is a pretty small place, so, but no, they did not.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be a coincidence, yeah.
That would be bizarre.
At this point, your mom and the family are going through kind of a hard time, right? What's going on with that?
It started with a lot of funerals that brought on a lot of depression. So again, these young men that were entertaining the silly little jokes and games that I wanted to play, now I'm attending their funerals. And my mom, of course, is doing the same. And I think that made something click in her brain, because at least for me, that is where I start to notice this disconnect, and where now my mother is a bad guy and my mother is a mean person. I would love to ask her about this. I never will, but I wonder if that was just like lose all of this loss of young boys that she cared for did something to her, because I mean, almost night and day, I suppose, probably not that clear, but for me, there was a point where it all shifted, and she developed a very nasty gambling addiction. It's interesting because I'm surrounded by criminals in my life, right? But my mother never was one in terms of alcohol addiction, drug addiction. That just seems like it would absolutely be part of the story. No, I've never seen her have a drink. What her vice was gambling. And that's extremely difficult when you're a single parent and you're spending a lot of money on bonds, bail bonds, and trying to raise 3 children. I think that she saw a glimmer of hope in winning a jackpot or just any tiny amount of money. And that's where my life took a really nasty turn. Being homeless was embarrassing. Of course, it was scary as well, but it was more so embarrassing because I still went to school. But I mean, of course, my mom sent me to school because at least there I get lunch and I get air conditioning or heating, depending on, the weather. I still have a lot of great memories from being homeless. Like our favorite spot to, I guess, post up was behind the Dollar General's dumpster. And I found a deck of Uno cards. And I love Uno because it's connected to this crazy thing in my life, this crazy time in my life, but such a great time as well. I was embarrassed because of the smell that I had, being unclean, not being able to brush my teeth. And so that sort of created a lot of distance between my friends and I. One of the best things about being homeless, though, is some of the treasures that you find. So again, being behind this Dollar General dumpster, I found a lot of books. And I was kind of struggling in school because, my home life is just absolute chaos. And so I knew how to read, but I really, by myself, I developed those reading skills. I feel like this is sort of cliche, but I would run away in those stories. Like, I wasn't behind a dumpster. I was in this little story space.
That's why they call it escape literature, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And boy, did it help. It was awesome. And it helped my imagination. While I did struggle, obviously, mentally, I just separated and I just daydreamed. And I was just fine.
The brain somehow figures out how to cope with different situations.
Absolutely.
Right?
On my 12th birthday, my mother and I went to visit. And again, like every birthday, I had essentially 2 birthday parties. One outside of prison and then one inside of prison. So we would coordinate with all of my little friends who were visiting their parents. And it was a great time. Over a Rice Krispie treat, my parents sang happy birthday. They asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I said that I want Dad to come home. I think I was over it at that point, and I thought that Dad coming home would mean that life would be better and we wouldn't struggle so much. And just immediately, my mom, I look over, and my mom has tears coming down her face. And in front of me, across the table, is just my dad with this. He's just staring down at the table, like he's ashamed. And my mom says, we should tell her. So he proceeds to tell me that he can't come home and that he probably never will come home. Okay, interesting. Why not? Like, you're a good guy. You can come home. Like, actually, why have I never even asked this before? Why are you still here? Why don't you leave with Mom and I? And he tells me that he hurt someone by accident, like self-defense. I don't believe that he used that word because not child really appropriate. And everything changed then. And he said that I got in trouble a very long time ago, before you and Mommy came into my life. And this is where I live. And this is where I will always live. And I really wish that I hadn't asked him to explain, just because that didn't give me really any answers.
When you wrote to me, you had mentioned that he expressed it, or he explained it, that he had a fight with his girlfriend and she went to heaven.
Yes.
You're almost a teenager at that point. That seems like the way you would explain something to a 5-year-old.
Agreed. And especially with, I'm surprised and a little offended that they didn't think that I could handle the truth, just because of everything that I had already been through. I might be 12, but honestly, I'm probably functioning on in a survival aspect of a full-blown adult. Like, I'm trying to game this system so I can find my next meal and my next roof. And so to say it like that, yeah, as an adult now, I take offense.
And you said your world changed that day.
I really wish that I didn't say that I want Daddy to come home. And I wish that that conversation essentially had never happened, because I was living in this awesome state. I have a mom and a dad, and that's enough for me. And I just something, I can't explain it. Something did not feel right. It just felt like there was something so much more. And I think with that, and because I'm 12, I'm still a child, I don't have a lot of agency over myself, right? Like, there's not a lot that I can demand, I suppose. And so I'm just forced to live in this world where they are happy with that answer. They think that answer suffices. And I knew that there was so much more to it.
So what do you do at that point? I mean, you can't, what options do you have?
I didn't have a lot, but what I did do was I stopped talking to Steven. I told my mom, like, I don't want to go. In fact, I'm not going. And that was a lot of fights. I guess that was my sort of rebellious stage. I'm not going. And she didn't make me. I mean, again, there were a lot of fights, but she didn't make me. And so that was the last time that I saw him.
And you also said you filed for emancipation. Can you talk about how does that work and how does a 12-year-old even know about that?
So I wasn't 12 when I filed for emancipation. I was 15. And my mother forced me to get a job. And I was happy to, so it wasn't much forcing. But on her side, she forced me to get a job so I could pay rent. So for emancipation, at least in the state of Oklahoma, you have to show that you are responsible, I guess, and able to take care of yourself. I had extremely good grades in school, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, this job will prove to them. So I worked and I squirreled money away that she didn't know about. So after I would pay rent and my portion of the bills, I would save whatever was left. I really took solace in my best friend's family. She had amazing parents, and her daughter, my best friend was going to stay the night one night, and she dropped her off and she saw the area where we lived. And she was like, you know what, Mayson, why don't you come and stay the night with us? Like, yeah, you guys come over here. And so we didn't think anything about it. And her mom sat me down and asked if I was okay. And at first I was just like, yeah, like, I'm totally fine. No adult has ever asked really if I'm okay. And with the trust that she had already built with me over time, I just told her the truth of where I was at. And she gave me all of these options. And she was like, you can move in with us, which I did against my mother's approval, I suppose. But she's too busy at the casino. Like, she's not going to file anything at the police station. My best friend's mother told me about emancipation, and we tried. We tried really hard to do that. But I was told that there are children out there who file for emancipation that essentially have it a lot worse. And I understood. I got that. I mean, at that point, I still felt helpless. But yeah, there are children actively being significantly abused. And right now I'm good. I just want my mother to not have any bearing over my life anymore. So I guess I can wait a few more years.
And you had to wait until you were 18 before you could really go out on your own?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So you turn 18. What happens then?
I moved away immediately. I left the first chance I got, which wasn't hard because I had been paying rent at this place for my mom. And I was keeping some of my stuff there. And I came home from school one day. This is like the week that I graduate high school. And all of our stuff was thrown out in black industrial bags. It was thrown out on the front lawn. And so we were homeless yet again. And I was like, I just have to make it 4 more days. I'm graduated, and then I'm going to take out this money that I've been saving, and I'm getting an apartment in Tulsa. And I moved 45 minutes away, and I started building my own life outside of my family, like having officially excommunicated them for, I guess at that point, the first time.
Why Tulsa?
Pryor doesn't have any colleges. And
that's the town you were living in?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's just what you do. If you want to go to college, you have to go elsewhere. So I moved to Tulsa. I got my own apartment. I was working at Best Buy, and I had no business working there, but that's because I just don't know technology. But I had a good job, and I had my own place, and I had my own car, and I was making an honest living, and I was doing it all on my own, and it was a really great time.
That must have been just such a great feeling. You're finally free.
Yes, it was. Absolutely. I didn't have to be subject to other people's motives and other people's mistakes and crimes. I just had to worry about myself now.
And you were attending community college. What did you want to go forward with? What kind of degree?
I have always wanted to be a teacher. I just didn't know what kind of teacher. I was leaning toward English, but I also really loved language, so Spanish. And so at the time I was getting a certificate in medical translation. So I would essentially work in a hospital as a translator, and whenever they had someone that couldn't speak English come in, then I would stand beside the doctor and just translate.
So it seems like you're on the right track at this point. And then what happened when you were 23?
When I was 23, I received a phone call out of the blue in a time where you don't really think about spam calls or scams. I answered. It's like, hello? And it said an inmate, and then it paused, and it was his voice, Stephen Arfstrom, would like to, contact you. This is a collect call, blah, blah, blah. And I had no time at all to react. It's a press 1 to accept or hang up. And so in just the snap of a finger, I had to figure out what I wanted to do. And I chose to answer. I felt like it was my time to get some answers. It was very awkward, very awkward at first, because we hadn't spoken for, what would that be, 11 years? Back when I was 12, I didn't think that would truly be the last time I saw him, but it was. And so now I'm just like, I'm gobsmacked. I have no idea what to say, think, or do. And so, honestly, I really don't remember what we talked about outside of me just getting a backbone, standing up straight and being like, tell me what happened. I'm an adult. I don't believe you. I never believed you. Tell me what happened. He told me that he was about to ship off to some branch of the military, and he had some unfinished business with his ex-girlfriend. He didn't want to leave on a nasty note, so he went over to her apartment to, make up. He told me that they had gotten into an argument and she had pulled a gun on him. And out of fear, he disarmed her. And at that point, she just sort of went wild, screaming, and just a very loud, chaotic moment. She was being loud, and in self-defense, he accidentally killed her. It's curious because I don't feel like you accidentally kill someone in the way that he killed her. He put a pillow over her face and smothered her. You know, we see movies, right, where because of screen time, smotherings or strangulations take just seconds. But no, it takes some time because the person passes out and then you have to keep depleting their air supply. So for me, it was just hard to believe that he accidentally did this. As soon as she stopped fighting back, you're clear. You're good. So again, I called bullshit. I just didn't believe it because he's such a massive man. And I've never seen a picture of his ex-girlfriend, but I have heard that she's very petite. And also, to be honest, I don't really care what size you are. There's a point where you know that it's too much, I feel like, and he just didn't stop. So he said that he put her in a cold water bath to try to revive her. And when that didn't work, he got scared and he fled to Missouri to be with his family and get some advice, I guess, some help.
But you didn't believe any of this.
No, I didn't. I felt like now we're getting closer to the truth. Now I'm starting to hear some details like, okay, not just we got in a fight and she went to heaven. Like, yeah, now I'm getting some aspects of the truth, but what is he holding back? And I also think at this point, I just don't trust I don't trust anyone from my family. So let me fact check this.
Right, because now you're a grown up. You know how to research things online. You can find out stuff. What did you find out?
I found out that Lisa was scared. Lisa is her name. And I found out that Lisa was scared. Her mother, in an interview, reported in a newspaper that she was pretty afraid of Stephen and that there had been some violent tendencies in the past. I'm not sure what those were, but it wasn't a healthy relationship. Everything that he told me was true, except for there was no gun. Lisa didn't own guns. She didn't have any. They never found one. He never brought that up in any interview, I suppose, or any account that he has given, except for to me. And he stole a lot of her electronics. In fact, 2 days later, I believe it was, when Lisa's mother hadn't heard from her, I believe they had lunch plans. And when Lisa didn't show, she got worried, went over, and I guess when she walked in, she just she looked around and saw it was kind of disheveled, and that her microwave, her radio, and her TV were missing. That's bizarre. And so I would imagine she calls out for Lisa's name and she finds her in the bathtub. And what Stephen had done was sold those electronics in order to flee.
I just can't imagine how traumatic it would be for a mother to find her daughter like that.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot.
Obviously, you weren't involved in that murder at all, but you've mentioned that you have felt guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from?
I think the guilt comes from loving someone and just thinking the absolute world of them, and having so much trust between, that relationship. And to know that the person who used their hands to love me were the same hands that caused the most horrific pain. They're the hands that took someone else's life. And that was my dad, like, Dad did this. Being his daughter, I just felt it's silly because you're right. Like, I had no part in this. This was way before I was even brought into existence. But I guess I feel guilty because I loved him. I showed him love and respect when he, in my opinion, deserved nothing.
That phone call was now 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Have you spoken with him since then?
No, I have not, and I never will. I've since changed my phone number. I have blocked my mother, so who knows if she has access to my phone number, honestly, like, anymore. So I would be very surprised if I ever got a surprise call from him, but I will never speak to him or see him again, even though there are times of darkness where I am very curious.
Do you feel any sense of loss from being cut off from them? I mean, you cut yourself off from them, so it was deliberate, but have you lost anything because of that?
I guess I've lost a typical childhood experience, if you will, but I used to struggle with the sense of loss a lot. There have been a lot of Christmases and Thanksgivings where I spent them completely alone. And those times used to be dark. And there are many times where I could have used a parent's advice. And there are many times, especially being so young and completely on my own, where it's lonely and scary knowing that if I'm ever in trouble, romantically, mentally, financially, that I have no one to turn to. I had my car stolen once when I was the second time that I tried to go to college. And when I was recounting this story to a friend, a new friend, she had asked me, why didn't you just call your parents? Just like, oh, I can't really do that. But in those times, you're scrambling to get back on your feet and figure it out yourself, that you don't really have any time to feel a sense of loss. And in my daily life now, definitely not. In fact, I feel this immense, power and pride. And I have an amazing husband. I have amazing friends. In fact, I talk to my best friend's mom on social media, literally every single day, if not every other. And so I have people, and I think through my loss of family, it's been what has opened doors to building trust and relationships with others. So while those thoughts have tried to creep in, no, not really.
Oh, you've made it.
I've made it.
You talk about your daily life. What is your life like now? What are you doing?
I live in the Pacific Northwest. It's always been my dream to move to Seattle. I really like the rain. And I live here, and I'm a professor I teach English as a second language and linguistics. And so I get to help people that are trying to build a new life in another country, and where things are completely chaotic for them, I get to help. And that has always been my dream.
And you're living it now.
I am indeed. Oh, yeah.
What made your story different? I mean, lots of kids come from poverty and dysfunctional families, and they're still in that cycle, but you're doing well. Do you any idea what the difference is for you?
This is a question I have asked myself so many times throughout every stage of my life. I think I experienced so much fear, insecurity, instability, cruelty, manipulation, and violence that at a very young age, I was forced to have a thought that no young child should have to contemplate. It's a thought that was way too big for me at the time. And that was, I don't want to be like this. What can I do to not be like this? What can I do to make sure that I don't behave this way? So that was always my guiding light, my path, I guess. I did everything the opposite of what my family did. They never graduated from high school. I made sure that I was going to, and that it was going to be that I was going to have really good grades. They never had a dream or a goal, no matter how big or small. And so I really latched on to that. I think by my own intention and circumstance, I didn't get wrapped up in the social systems of my family. And I also learned independence at a very young age. So while I grew up in the traps or around the traps of poverty and violence, I was determined to grow up not totally inside of it, where my body could go through the effects of poverty, but my mental fortitude, I suppose, needed to stay elsewhere. And I've just never felt like them. I mean, I didn't mention this when I wrote in, but I've even legally changed my first name. I chose this name on my own because I don't want any connection, and that has always been the case.
You've done it. It's so wonderful to hear a story like this.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about contacting your biological father?
That's interesting. I was always pretty curious to do it, but I've seen him on social media. He has a full-fledged family, and it looks like they have a great time. And so I never reached out. And then one day I got on just out of curiosity, and I looked him up, and I learned that he had passed. He passed last December. And so that door is obviously officially closed. And even if I wanted to now, even if I had a shift 5 years from now and decided that, you know what, man, I would like to, it's not going to happen.
One thing you mentioned earlier is that just before your first birthday, Stephen in prison signed your birth certificate. Mm-hmm. Did that mean that you were legally adopted by him?
I had never thought of it until you asked me this question.
A few days ago.
Yeah, just a few days ago.
Okay.
And I had never considered it because I didn't think it was a question that ever needed to be considered. I suppose I took it at face value and thought that was the process. And him signing my birth certificate, that's what it meant. But in preparation for this, I was very curious, so I did some research, and it turns out that in the state of Oklahoma, it does not constitute paternity, or I would imagine the same for maternity. What you have to do is you have to file an acknowledgement of paternity and get it notarized and then signed off by a judge. And then you become, I guess, like in the eyes of the law, the legal father. So I have just now learned that Stephen was never my father. And I understand that neither blood nor laws, that doesn't make a father. But it's definitely a shift in my reality.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just a legal status, but it's something that you've thought to be the case for 33 years, and now you realize it never was.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to take a little time to process that, I think, right?
Just add that to the list of trauma, I guess. And yeah, I'll be thinking about that and talking about that, I'm sure in the weeks to come. But yeah, that was a big surprise. It's hard to talk about because it just happened. And so I don't even have all of my thoughts formulated yet. But it is just, again, surprise. One thing that I was the last to know about, and just another thing that I had to find out through research.
Why do you want your story to be known?
Before I became a professor, I taught at an inner city high school. And these kids were just like me, born into poverty and violence. And I've seen the way that they are looked at. I've received those looks of, you're a lost cause. I've been treated differently because of the name my brothers and my father and my mother have made for themselves. And I think that that's the worst thing that could happen to them, is being given up on, because they will give up on themselves. And so I share my story, and I have seen by saying, like, hey, look, man, I get it. Like, here's my experience. And they're like, oh, but you're a teacher. I'm like, I know, crazy, right? Like, yeah, look at me now. Like, this could be you. And it starts a conversation. And I think when I am vulnerable with this, I've seen it inspire people, I guess, young kids. But I guess for those that share in any aspect of my story, I hope it brings them peace, knowing that it can end well. And I hope maybe perhaps it gives them the strength or inspiration to make a difficult decision that maybe they've been grappling with. And just know that you absolutely can break the cycle and find your own success, peace, and happiness. And just to be clear, I want it to be very understood that when I say success, I don't mean you have to have a college degree. You have to have formal education. I tell my students this all the time. You don't have to have that to be successful. So whatever it is that you are chasing, you can do that.
And the fun part will be 10 or 15 years from now when a student contacts you and says, hey, guess what? I made it.
Oh, yeah. I really can't wait, because I've done that to all of my high school teachers that did that for me. And so it's really awesome. And I hope that one day I'll be on the receiving end. That would be very cool, because then it's not all for nothing.
After our conversation, there was one other thing I wanted to ask Mayson about. I was wondering if there's ever a chance that Stephen will get out on parole.
I believe it's every 3 years he comes up for parole. And so technically there is a chance, but Lisa's parents have made a very strong community of protesters in Lisa's memory and honor. And every year that he goes up for parole, I check and I see how many letters are reported to be written. And it's a pretty staggering number. And so I think with the help of that community, I do not believe that he will ever get out.
You might have a question for Mayson that I didn't ask her. If that's the case, she's in the What Was That Like Facebook group, along with about 8,000 other listeners. And a lot of the guests from previous episodes are in there too. And we talk about a lot of things, not just podcast episodes. In fact, this past Tuesday in the group, I posted the question, what were you addicted to that you no longer consume? Yeah, I used to be addicted to something, so I posted my answer, and so did a lot of other people. Come on over and join us. whatwasthatlike.com/Facebook. Got a voicemail from a listener, and this one needs a content warning since the caller is talking about SA on a child.
Hey, Scott. It's been a while since I've kind of wanted to share this, but I recently listened to your episode where Justine talked about her brother, and I have a person in my family, my grandfather, who I really don't like to call my grandfather, but 5 or 6 years ago, I found out that he had raped a 12-year-old girl and gotten her pregnant. And I did everything I could to try to get him in jail because the family were trying to protect him. And although they never knew that it was me that called the cops on him, they have a high suspicion of it, and he never got to jail. And I have suspicion of someone in the family maybe paying off an officer or something due to police corruption happening there. But it was confirmed that he had raped the girl. There was even a fraternity test done by one of his sons, and it was confirmed, so the family knew it was true. Now, I, in a way, kind of live in fear, although that side of the family doesn't know that it was me. They have a suspicion, and so it's really rough. It's a really crazy situation. There are so many other things to go along with it, but that requires more time. But every day I kind of have to live with knowing that I have family members that, they're pretty much terrible people who are okay with that. And seeing and hearing her story really helped me when I heard it just today, because it lets me know that I'm doing the right thing and that I did the right thing and that I don't have any regrets.
The episode that caller is talking about is from a few weeks ago, and it's titled, Justine Feared Her Brother. I've had a lot of really positive feedback about that one, so go check it out if you haven't heard it already. Graphics for this episode were created by Bob Bretz. Full episode transcription was created by James Lai. And now, the segment you've been waiting for, the listener story. Every episode ends with one of these, just a 5 to 10 minute story sent in by a listener. You can send one in too. Just record it on your phone and email it to me, scott@whatwasthatlike.com. When you hear this week's story, you might find yourself thinking, wow, that guy really knows how to tell a story. And that would make sense. This one is from my friend Greg, and he hosts his own podcast called The Compulsive Storyteller. This story is one of my favorites from his show, and if you like this one, he has lots more for you to binge. Stay safe, and I'll see you here next week with a flashback episode.
Ratatouille 2. I'm embarrassed to tell people that we have a pet rat. When I first met Laura, she had a pet rat, which I thought was pretty weird. She was a fantastic woman in every way, so I decided I'd try to put up with it. When she moved in, he moved in, and I've definitely warmed up to the little guy. He's half white and half gray, as if his hindquarters were dipped into a can of gray paint. He's mischievous, smart, and independent. We renamed him Ratsky. Today, I'm putting the finishing touches on his new 4-story home. I've repainted an old bookcase, cut holes in the 3 interior shelves, and run little ramps between the floors. The ramps are configured one above the other in the same way that staircases are in most buildings. Ratsky now lives in an old, dilapidated parrot cage. He can only spend time on the floor of the cage, so it's not the ideal setup for him. However, most of the time, he just explores all the nooks and crannies of our loft. I have built this new house in part because a week from today, next Friday, we will have some very important guests visiting. I want to get rid of the parrot cage habitat and had the idea of this new home, which we will hide away when the guests arrive. My girlfriend Laura is a temporary translator for a newly arrived French diplomat, and he and his wife are coming out to our loft for dinner. He's also a serious art collector, which explains in part our efforts in preparing for his visit. Laura tells me that she thinks they want to check out our art as well as our loft and see how a couple of real New York artists live. Laura is creating something special for their visit, a new avant-garde couch of sorts. She's purchased 8 big blocks of foam rubber, 4 cubes to sit on, and 4 thick, taller rectangles to lean back on. The overall couch will be L-shaped, and she's engaged a tailor from down the block to sew zippered light gray canvas coverings. Now it's Sunday evening, and I move Ratsky from his old parrot cage into his new digs. He's been allowed to roam the space most days, but we keep him locked out of his cage when he's exploring. That way when we call him in the evening, he's hungry and he always comes. Then he's locked in for the night. I always call him by singing out his name in a falsetto, Ratsky, Ratsky, and there he is. Tonight I call him to his new home, and he comes hesitantly because of the change in routine. But he's hungry, and there's food inside, along with water and some clean rags for a new bed and also some pet toys. He enters, eats, and explores. On Tuesday, the foam rubber and the canvas coverings arrive, and everything fits perfectly. Ratsky has also adapted well to his new 4-story house. The day after his first night there, he moved in a few of his treasures from the parrot cage, a piece of red rubber, a scrap of sequin cloth, and a peanut shell. We've also supplied the cage with all sorts of new small toys. Thursday has arrived, and we start shopping in earnest for the dinner party. Yesterday I chose the wine and decided to avoid French wine because I don't want to make any faux pas of any sort because of my lack of knowledge of French vineyards, and instead chose a few bottles of white from an excellent California vineyard. In the evening, I call Ratsky, and he shows up immediately and races into his new cage for a meal and a night's sleep. Today is Friday, the big day. We shop in the morning, whole wild salmon, asparagus and shallots, and those different colored little baby potatoes. We get some great desserts from Dean and DeLuca, which I call Dean and Dinero. We'll be making our own hors d'oeuvres. There is one big potential problem, though, the couch. It's been set up and sat on a few times, but I've never really thrown myself down on it. When I do, the vertical back blocks tip over and I fall backwards. I think to myself, damn, now we need a quick fix, because we plan to sit on the couch with our guests for appetizers and drinks before adjourning to the dinner table across the loft. We decide on a 2-part solution, sandwiching multiple strips of 2-sided adhesive tape between the back of the blocks and the standing rectangles, and then to be on the safe side, I use some heavy twine to sew them together behind the base blocks. Voila, problem solved. The other problem is Ratsky, so we move his cage into the laundry room. I'm pretty sure that our guests, like most people, are not fond of rats. It's funny, I've been so completely converted by Laura to liking Ratsky that I, like her, find most references to rats in popular culture to be offensive. You dirty rat. They ratted him out. He's a filthy rat. This place looks like a rat's nest. References to gym rats and mall rats are less offensive. But of course, we both resist telling people how we feel about their unkind words towards rats. It's just too weird on our part. They are due at 7, so at 6:30 I call Ratsky. I sing out his name, and today of all days, no Ratsky. We both waste valuable time searching, even though there are still preparations to be completed. Upstairs, in the studio, the laundry room, the office, Ratsky! Ratsky! But he's nowhere to be found. So we decide on a fallback plan if he doesn't appear before they do. One of us has to be on the lookout in case he makes a beeline for our guests. That someone is me. When the buzzer rings, we both look anxiously at each other, close our eyes, touch foreheads, and shake our heads from side to side. Then we put on our happy faces and greet our guests at the door. We all make small talk about their getting up the freight elevator and our great views of the city. Then we sit down at the couch for appetizers and wine. I'm incredibly anxious, but a glass of wine does wonders. It also makes my eyes lapse for a few seconds from rat patrol. Suddenly, from the far side of the space, Ratsky makes his move. The woman has just raised a pretty little hors d'oeuvre to her lips when he jumps on and across the coffee table and runs straight up the front of her dress. She screams a scream that is truly operatic, a horrified, blood-curdling scream, and at the same time, she completely straightens her body out of fear. Ratsky has taken off with the hors d'oeuvre as soon as she starts screaming, but she doesn't know that. Because she stiffens her body, our two-sided tape job and sewing completely fail, and the rear of the couch flips backwards, and she does too. Continuing to tumble backwards, she ends up with both her pantyhosed legs flailing in the air and still screaming, and the bottom edge of her skirt has fallen down to her hips. The biggest problem is that for Laura and I, the situation is completely hilarious. The harder we try not to, the louder and more uncontrollably we laugh. We're laughing so hard that we're crying, but not so the diplomat. As I laugh, I clumsily try to help his wife right herself, not knowing exactly where to take hold of her, and she inadvertently gives me a good kick. Then her husband pushes me aside and helps her up. He hugs her, whispering, "Mon petit chou," in her ear to calm her. And then he has some very nasty French words for Laura and I. She stops screaming and is now crying, but still our muffled laughter continues. What we're doing is so wrong, which makes it all the more funny. After a flurry of French expletives on the part of the husband, they leave in a hurry. Laura and I fall onto the couch, and out comes Ratsky, not to take a bow, but to clean up all the hors d'oeuvres that were scattered on the floor. The upshot of the evening is that Laura is barred from the office when she goes in to apologize. Her things are unceremoniously given to her in a cardboard box, and she's asked to leave. They never return our phone calls, nor respond to our apology note, the writing of which makes us both hysterical again. No matter how we phrase our apologetic description of the events of that evening, it's beyond funny. At one point, we make up a name for her, Madame Recamier, who is one of the subjects of Ingres's most famous paintings. Since then, whenever either of us needs a pick-me-up, the other one just has to call out Madame Recamier, and we both giggle and sometimes howl with laughter. Sadly, Laura's and my relationship didn't make it, but we did briefly get back together for Ratsky's funeral. He lived for 4 years, which is a long life for a rat. He's buried in a grave in Greenwood Cemetery, marked only by a couple of his treasures, both of which disappeared over time. To this day, though, I'm still offended when people say nasty things about rats.